Welcome to a brand new episode of Show Me the Crypto. This week, we chat with Mathew Sweezey, aka Sweezey, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Smart Token Labs, about all things in the future of tokens, tokenization, and how we may get to a point where tokens represent more than just collectibles or currency, but actually experiences. Ulf, what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, to dive into that concept, what does it mean to have a token that is an experience and not just a play in DeFi was something that we really got into with Sweezey. He did a great job explaining how these tokens will provide experiences in the future, sort of correlating them to apps on a phone and digging into what a smart token is, how it's going to work, what are some of the use cases and the way it could play out in the future. These are all things that he explained really well. And I think we asked the right questions to dig in and hopefully help you as the listener wrap your head around this new technology also.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And listen, Sweezey is the guy to talk about this. I mean, he has a rich background in marketing. He was with Salesforce for about a decade. He's authored a number of books. He considers himself to be a quasi-futurist. So this was a really exciting conversation. Enjoy.
Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our interviews with some of the most intelligent and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Mathew Sweezey, aka Sweezey, Chief Strategy Officer of Smart Token Labs. A pioneer of the marketing automation space, Sweezey is author of several books, including The Context Marketing Revolution. With more than a decade of experience at Salesforce, he co-founded Salesforce Web3 Studio in 2021 before going on to join Smart Token Labs earlier this year. Outside of Web3, Sweezey describes himself as an adventurer, trend spotter, and, quote, good furniture maker. Sweezey, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
What's up, guys?
Stoked for this conversation. So I want to start off on the adventure theme. Of course, we're going to get into all things Web3, but whether it's biking, whether it's hiking, whether it's surfing, what has been the coolest adventure you've been on?
Oh, shit, that's a hard one. How do we define cool? I mean,
however you want to.
Up to you.
Oh, shit. I guess it's just going to be the most recent. Did a big backpacking trip through it's called the Wind River Range up in Montana, or it was Wyoming. It's Wyoming. And that was like a month ago. And it was just like 45 miles over 2 nights. So it was just a long, super beautiful, amazing. Every time you turned around the corner, there was another massive granite wall. It's like a Yosemite Valley, but better.
That's awesome. So is this a regular theme of your life? Like you're constantly kind of seeking out these various trips, these various adventures?
Yes. I mean, I live out in Boulder with a bunch of other people that are similar minded. And so we just all get out as much as we can. I try to put in 200 days of outdoor sport a year between like skiing, snowboarding, mountain biking, surfing. So yeah, just try to get out as much as I can, climbing.
Very cool. And I've heard you on other interviews kind of define yourself as a futurist. And I'm curious, is this something like, was there a moment in time growing up where this interest in future technology was sparked? Like, can you draw it back to, was this childhood? Was this after high school? When did you get interested in the future of tech?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So one is I call myself a quasi-futurist. So if you're down with futurism, you know that it's a very specific discipline. And I'm very cautious of people calling themselves futurists without having a background in that discipline. So I studied under one of the world's leading futurists, Peter Schwartz at Salesforce. He's the guy that created scenario planning, helped make Shell, very influential man in the world of futurism. And So what got me into the future and what got me into what's next is I just like being on the edge. I like to move fast. I like to try things, I like to break things. I like to see what works and figure things out. It's like a puzzle. And so that's really fun. And so when you like to do that, you can focus on a topic. One topic that is always changing and that always allows you to do that is the future. So if you can focus on that, you usually can have a pretty fun career. Yes, there'll be ups and downs. We can talk about our current crypto future and kind of what that looks like and how that plays out. But yeah, just it's a topic that is always interesting. It's fun, and it's a place that you can pioneer and build things. So if you got from my intro, I like to build things.
And we'll definitely get into the crypto side of it here, but I admit you sparked my interest when you mentioned that futurist has a very specific definition, and I don't know what that is, but I'd love to hear like what is that specific definition of what it is to be a futurist, and why are you only a quasi-futurist?
Only a quasi-futurist. Yeah. So futurism is a discipline. And so it's a pretty rigorous discipline. So if you're going to do like what we would call capital F future, which means you're going to look about a 10-year time horizon, and you're going to look at about 8 or 9 different global forces and how those things come together. And then you'll take those things and you'll find what are like the real big levers that will then determine this type of a future. And then you'll look at a series of scenarios that may exist in that future state. And those will be the ideas. You'll then have what we would call like trigger or moments, which will saying if one of these triggers happens, that we then know which one of these most likely possible futures is probably going to play out and be accurate. So most people just say they're futurists because they just like to read about technology or they like to think about what's next. And so like there's a lot of my colleagues in the world who will claim futurist, but really have no idea how to run any type of a futures actual program. So it's like a very specific program and process that follows scenario planning, and it comes out with a set of essentially possibilities rather than this is what the future is. So anytime anybody tells you they know what the future is, you first off know that they're not a futurist because no one actually knows the future.
Is that what led you, or is that the process you utilized to come up with your concept for the book, The Context Marketing Revolution?
No, that was actually based off of a theory from Marshall McLuhan. So if you're a media wonk and you're super nerdy, or if you're Canadian, right, he's known as Canada's greatest thinker. So Marshall McLuhan. So I got to work with his son and grandson on those theories. And so the idea was essentially, if you look at media, so I'll take 2 steps back. How that all happened was I asked a question. This is many, many, many years ago, but the question was, how much will the price of demand fluctuate in the future, given like the technological changes that we're experiencing, right? Will it be cheaper or more expensive for a business to drive demand in the future? And so I started kind of going down that rabbit hole. And then I started to look at, you start to see this new idea of media. And this is right about when social media started to kind of hit in the marketplace. And we could start to see things were different. And then so I really started to understand how that impacted things from a large scale. And what really came down to is this idea that marketing is a game, and the games are dictated by the media environment that we find ourselves in. And so we've been playing this game, air quotes, of marketing that was really created for a 1970 media market where the businesses owned the entire control of media, and they could then push out a very limited set number of advertisements and messages into the market. There were no competing narratives. So you end up with very specific, what I call games, right? Which is like sex sells. There's no such thing as bad press. These marketing idioms, and essentially proved that all those things were wrong in the modern era. And actually, we need to rethink a lot of the fundamental ideas, such as like the notion of personalization. It's not how much can I personalize something that I want to force on someone, but it's how personal can that message actually be delivered to them, i.e. the apex of personalization in our modern world is one person delivering a message to another person. And that's just what we would call human to human. I'd say that's probably always been true. But now when we start to see it in the light of what is possible, we see things very differently. And you can start to see like user generated content, where you start to see the notion of communities, and you start to see how these things shift and are different. And we really start to get into some very fundamental ideas that are different in the modern era of how we think about going to market, how we think about utilizing communities, and really kind of all spurred based on kind of a changed media landscape, which I call the infinite media era.
Well, I'd love to pull in a little of your learnings or previous hypothesis with the context marketing revolution later in the conversation, because I watched a presentation you did talking about, I presume, everything in the book here. And you had mentioned, like, this was from years ago, and you were talking about what AI is going to, where it's going to be in the future, which is kind of where it is now. So you were very accurately predicting how AI is going to sort of revolutionize and come in and play a part in everyone's everyday life. And I thought that was really interesting, given that's now the case. So I'd love to come back to that a little bit later and see how maybe that plays a role in crypto and with blockchain technology as well. But now that we can maybe move into that area, how did you first discover crypto, and what was your initial impressions?
Yeah, so I think there's two answers to this. The first time I discovered it was by like 2000, I don't know, a year after. Was that 2010, after the paper and after people start mining? I had a guy that I worked with who's like, hey man, I'm going to start mining this Bitcoin stuff. And I was like, hey, that's cool. Carry on, my friend. Fill me in a few years on what this actually means. And so very familiar with that. And then looking through the lens of, futurism, it's definitely something that it's on the radar, right? So I very much knew about blockchain. I sit in a very specific position. I always look at how technology changes the relationship between brands and consumers. That's always been my purview. And so I did not see blockchain as itself changing that relationship between brands and consumers, because I only saw it as a financial lever. I didn't see it as an experience lever. And so I really kind of just didn't really focus on it. I knew that like payments would change, but to me, like if I use a credit card, or if I use cash, or if I use digital currency, to me, that doesn't necessarily change the relationship. It just changes some aspect of the transaction. Then fast forward, and now we get to talk about Boulder, and my buddy's a trader. And so, what he was talking about was that he's like, hey man, listen, all my trader buddies are trading these things called NFTs. We need to start following what these things are and get into these things. So we throw some money into a pot together, and we start buying some NFTs, and we start of course, we lost some money on NFTs. We had some good wins on NFTs. But that's what got me in, is when I saw that we can now start to see things differently. To me, this was kind of the first notion of this can change the experience. This can change the relationship. And that's what got me interested in crypto to begin with. So it was NFT. So I came in the wave that many of us came through.
And you were director of market strategy at Salesforce and co-founded Salesforce Web3 Studio. Can you explain, because it's, according to your resume, at least it appears that was your first professional foray into the world of crypto and Web3. Can you explain what Salesforce Web3 Studio is and what prompted you to co-found it?
Sure. So yes, it was my first professional foray into the Web3 space and the crypto space. So what we had is, at the time I was looking at my role at Salesforce was very interesting. I really focused on the future and really the intersection of those things, how technology changed the relationship of brands. And I was allowed to do a lot of cool things, right? I wrote the book for Harvard. I got to, travel around the world, helping CMOs see the future, work with the world's leading futurists, was a partner at the Futures Lab. And then I started to see this technology and I wanted to do something with it. So I started poking around, and I found, the head of emerging tech and product. And I said, hey, I want to create essentially an FWB for, this business world for crypto, right? And he's like, cool, go do that. And so that was the initial impetus for me to just go play around. And then we started to really solidify this idea of what the studio was. And really, the studio was there to do two things. One, was there to help connect marketers to the idea of crypto. And then two was to help us figure out what are the products that we then create and take to market inside of this. So we really were a studio that helped figure out what is Salesforce going to build, and then how do we take that to market, as well as then helping our customers figure out what this means for them. So I got to work with the world's largest brands. What does Web3 mean to them, what their Web3 projects are. I ran Salesforce's, Web3 advisory board, which sat most everyone that you know of, from, Keith Grossman all the way through to, the head of Adidas Web3 all the way down. So that was kind of what we focused on. And we ended up building the world's first enterprise Web3 CRM. And so that was kind of our product that we launched to really help a lot of the major brands really connect Web2 identities to Web3 identities. So if you're Adidas, you have a problem. If I bought a pair of shoes and I bought an NFT, you now have two different types of assets for me. How do I service you and market to you as a consumer, essentially through an omni-channel methodology? So that's what we helped create.
What I find impressive about that is the conviction and the quick turnaround, like, right? So you talk about, diving deep into NFTs. I'm presuming that's 2021-ish, probably. That was kind of the year it popped off. And then in the same year, right, starting that Salesforce Web3 Studio. So I guess that's the question, is what gave you that conviction to be like, or was it more just, I'm going to experiment, and then the further along we go here, we can start making this bigger and bringing brands into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, so there wasn't just me. You had our CEO, right, Mark Benioff, who liked the idea. He had a lot of friends talking with him, and he was very influenced in this idea, right? So we had full executive support from the highest levels. We essentially were seated under the president. So we sat under Alex Dayon as the studio. And so we reported literally to the president of the company. So it was, very high profile because the executive suite liked the idea and concept. And it was very hot in the marketplace. And so that was kind of how we sat. And so there's lots of people. But yeah, we went quickly. I mean, that's how you get to test and learn. And then that's what we're still doing today, is testing and learning as an industry.
So what led you then earlier this year? Was it May of this year to join Smart Token Labs?
So I started working with them in about February, and then we made it official and announced it in about the June timeframe, just from a PR standpoint. Held off on the announcement for a while. And what led me to start to work with Smart Token Labs is I was working with all of the Fortune 500 companies. Three very big things became apparent. Right. And it's a dirty secret that unless you're in the enterprise, no one knows. Web3 in the enterprise is not what we think it is. Right. Most of these Web3 teams, number one, don't have a budget. If they do have a budget, it's very tiny. A lot of them are just doing these things because they like them and they want to explore. Most CEOs believe that Web3 can have some meaningful impact to their business, but they currently don't like the idea of currencies or collectibles, right? There's too many legal risks with regulations, with them having to become a bank with, is this a financial asset? Is this security? So you've got that issue. You've got the user experience issue where their job is to remove consumer friction, not create more consumer friction. In the current state that we find ourselves in, traditionally, we're seeing that we are increasing consumer friction if we put Web3 in place, specifically in a Web2 world, right? If you go into a Web3 world, they've already, taken that pill. There's no more pain. But if you're going to go tell somebody to do this thing with me, you first have to go through these 15 steps and suck up this much pain. That better be a damn big payout at the end. And it's not necessarily, right? A JPEG is not going to really be that threshold for 99.9% of the people. And the other 1% are the degens. So, those aren't many people's customers. So you've got that. So you've got, the legal issues, you've got the friction. And then the last big thing you've got is no company wants to put their database in a public ledger, right? That's a very hard concept for most people to understand at this point in time. And because they don't want to do that, because they say, I don't want to have essentially a vampire attack. I don't want my, competition to come in to know who my top customers are, and then to instantly be able to poach those customers in any way, shape, or form, right? So you've got those three issues. So working with Smart Token Labs, I realized that there's technologies that can bypass those things, right? So we can essentially solve the issue of the enterprise, of the Web2 world, and then allow them to start to move into Web3 and to start to leverage Web3. And that's what really got me interested. And that's why I joined the team. Was I first saw a solution that could actually work for Web2, and a type of technology that could actually work for Web2 to solve their existing problems. And so that's why I joined to help bring that to market.
Now, something you've mentioned in this conversation and before is that we need to see tokens beyond currencies and collectibles, but as experiences. Can you just dive into that in more detail?
Oh, I can go really deep into detail. So let's take a step back. We have to start from the highest level. We all got into this world from various angles. I came in through the angle of, I believe this technology can change the relationship between brands and consumers. We have to realize that is my bias, right? I see the world through that lens, right? If I see anything, I see it through that lens. And so I saw this new technology and I saw it through that lens. I think the big question that we as the Web3 world are asking ourselves right now, is that actually real? Because I think the question we all have is there a use case for this world beyond DeFi? Right? That's what we're literally talking about here, is beyond currencies and collectibles means, does this technology have some other application beyond DeFi? In the short term, we don't know. In the long term, the likelihood is we hope so. We think so. But for us to move into what we call the mainstream world and into the Web2 world, we have to really start to solve use cases beyond those things. If not, we need to be very understanding. The Western world does not have problems that crypto solves. The Western world uses crypto as a speculative asset. The rest of the world, the developing nations, the developing world, uses crypto to essentially solve problems that their government can't solve, which is, let's have a currency that is stable. Let's have a way to have identity that doesn't get erased every time the government changes hands, right? These are big problems, but they're not problems in the developing world, right? So if we look at it through this lens, the first question we all have to ask is, are there use cases beyond DeFi? I think there are. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at here and trying to go down that rabbit hole. And when I go down that rabbit hole, if I say, what is different than DeFi? To me, those are experiences, because that is essentially the crux of everything in the business world, is whoever creates the best experience wins. And if you go through this like logical flow of what I call digital service delivery, you start to like see how like transformational and radical this can be, right? We get the internet, we build websites. Whichever businesses embraced that concept at a fundamental level, essentially upended their markets and became the market leaders because they found a new way to deliver services that created a better consumer experience, right? So you just go through that, right? Who are those big winners? You got Salesforce, you got Netflix, you got Amazon, you got Google, you got Facebook, right? They all dominate, right? Because they understood that digital service delivery, that new world, that new paradigm. Then we move that next to apps, and we say, cool, we can do all that, but can we do that offline and on a mobile device? And then we have this app-based revolution. And now you have a world where the app-first companies are dominating the world, right? WeChat, you've got Baidu, you've got all the apps and mega apps. You've got Grab, you've got Uber, you've got Instagram, you've got TikTok. These are all app-first businesses, right? And so then if you follow that trend, what I believe is for us to move past this idea, we need to start thinking about other things. And I think tokenized experience is a really good idea, where what happens when experiences in digital service delivery becomes modular, meaning it's delivered through a token. And so rather than you having a central app or a central website, those things can be pulled out and put inside of tokens. And then those can be delivered in the moment. So real-time experience is delivered in the moment, where the individual is not only owning their data, they carry their data with them, but they also carry their applications with them, right? And so you can get into radical new experiences. And I think the easy example is like, what if you're signing up for Uber and you've got to prove that you have insurance? So you connect your token to the website. Uber's like, cool, you got insurance, but you don't have the right insurance. You need to up this insurance to the next level. If that was a modular service, that token is the modularity. Through that token in that moment, I can interact with my insurance company and top up my insurance. That service was delivered to me in a modular format when I needed it, where I needed it. And so I think we can start to see these things. That's to me what, the big idea of the future could be. But once again, like that's a possibility. And we may be years away before we start to see modular digital services. But I do believe that would be the next era of digital service delivery, modularity.
And then one of the things you had mentioned earlier is that for people to be using this technology, sometimes like there's so many steps that the experience has to be that good. Do you think it has to be a combination? Like, does the tech and being able to use Web3, does that have to get easier plus the experience has to be that good? Or do you think that people will get over that friction point in order to have that great experience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the person, right? So either one, you have to have it's because it's a basic equation, right? You've got to pay out at the end. If that payout is high enough, people will suck up and go through enough pain, right? And I think the easy example is every car UX is different, right? We suck up the UX and take 3 months to learn how to drive a car and figure out all the different buttons. Hell, I was in somebody's car yesterday and I like clicked a button and they're like, I didn't know that could do that. And they'd had the car for 5 years, right? And I was like, cool. Glad I could help with that. And so I think if the payout's big enough, people will suck up the pain. Right now, the payout's not big enough, right? And so we now have to focus on UX. What can we do with the UX? How can we get a better UX so that we can at least get people to understand some aspect of this? And I think that question of some aspect goes back to what value do we actually solve in the daily consumer's lives? And that changes something fundamentally different about this. And I think those are the big questions, because when you ask that question, you end up with the question of, well, then what's the use case? And so every brand we go to, they say will bring me the use case. Brands aren't coming up with the use case. It has to be the people that are building the products and the change, the protocols, and the builders in the space that are coming up with the use cases and then bringing those back to brands. So I think you either have to have, depending on if the payout is big enough, you can have enough pain, or you're going to have a really low threshold so that people can at least find any kind of value and grow from there. So I see it as an either or of both at the same time.
So I just want to go back to the example you gave around how, what it means to have tokens that are experiences versus currencies and collectibles. And the reason I want to go back is just for more clarity's sake on exactly how this all works. So is this something that, are we talking about a token that's like an NFT, but not utilized in the way an NFT is utilized currently? So what I'm thinking in my head is, with your example, you get into an Uber, and at what point is that sort of recognition around your profile and your maybe account, that I presume that's what's attached to the information on the token that you own, is then, and then there's this other data around your insurance, and how would that get updated in the moment? Is that happening through an app? Again, I realize this is all hypothetical, but I want to better understand what that hypothetical future would look like and how the use case could really play out.
Yeah, let's answer this in a couple ways. The first thing is, what we're talking about is token-centric architecture. Right. So if you think about how the way the internet is currently connected, it's all through databases and APIs. Right. That's great when we want to do one-to-one. It becomes very hard when you want to scale beyond one-to-one, when you want to scale one-to-many. Right. And so the scenario I gave with Uber, that the example is that I am a person who wants to sign up to be an Uber driver, and I'm interfacing with Uber's website to sign up to be an Uber driver. So it's not me as a rider in that experience. It's me as signing up as a driver, needing to prove that I have those rights. And in that example, the token is the interface. And what we're talking about here is some technology that Smart Token Labs has created. And it can be any type of token. It can be an ERC 720, 721, 1155. It doesn't matter the token type. There's a new ERC called ERC 5169 that allows a token to point to an external URI. And what that allows a token to do is carry some type of an external or executable script with it. If you've heard of the term executable NFTs, it's pretty popular in the Solana world through a protocol and a app, I believe it's called Backpack. So we do something very similar, but in the EVM world, and go much further than that. So you have the ability to, number one, carry executable script. And then the second thing is you have the ability to have that thing carry a front end or a GUI. So we've actually created a standard called token script, which now enables how do we actually visually display this token, and what does this token actually do? Giving that token the ability to become a mini dApp in and of itself. So you're not having to have another application. The token is the application. It can carry its own front end. We've done this for some of the world's largest car companies, where we actually tokenized a car. And what that meant was the token is the app. You get given the token, it goes into your wallet, you open the token, and through that literal interface, the token itself, you push a button to start your car. You push a button to unlock the car. You want to rent the car. So there's another button on the token. You want to sell the car, right? So when you start to see that the token is the center of an experience, this is what I mean by experience, right? If I now go anywhere, the token is the center. And so if I go to a service center, I connect the token and they update the token. I then carry that with me. If I go to the DMV, I connect the token, and that then is reflected and it connects, whereas the token is the center. And so if we want to think about another example, the way that I see the world is networks. And when I look at the world, everything to me is a network. And so literally what we're doing with token-centric architecture is enabling these networks to operate more efficiently and effectively, removing the barriers of PII and GDPR compliance, right? Two organizations want to then treat each other's customers like each other's customers. It's very difficult because they can't share that information and data. If I give the individual a token, and then I can supercharge that token to make it executable and do all kinds of different features and functionalities, there's now the use case and usability. They then can become the center of an experience. If I'm an airline and I give them that ticket and I give them this type of experience on top of that, they then can go to Airbnb, they connect the token, Airbnb says, cool, we know the dates of travel. We know that you're a premium traveler. And so we're going to automatically treat you differently. Oh, and by the way, if you book with us, we'll automatically upgrade your flight. And all that happens through the token. So the individual brings their own data. Now they don't have to worry about a connection between the two parties. They can validate that you're a premium flyer. And then they can even work backwards through that token to then interface with the issuing party to then give you an experience that's never been possible before, which is upgrading your ticket. So does that kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit further?
Absolutely. And just to dig in a little more, would it be accurate or not accurate to say that the token, if we wanted to just exchange it for another word, we're talking about these smart tokens, essentially they're apps, but they're owned and operated as you would say an NFT. So you keep it in your Web3 wallet, but you can now open and interact with it. It's got an interface, it can execute. It very much works and functions like an app on your phone. And from the other side, the provider of this token has some sort of level of access to upgrade or change users' tokens or apps, if we want to call them that in this scenario, to give them more functionality or detect, certain changes or actions that then could upgrade or change the experience within that token. Am I getting it, or am I still
totally
off
right?
base?
It's a token as an application. It's the token becomes a front end, not just a back, because you can call a token an application now. A smart contract is an application, right? But what you now have is the ability, exactly right, for that token to have a front end and to be a user experience in and of itself, and to be an application in and of itself. And just like any other app, you're correct. Like the issuing party can then update that, change that, because it's all through ERC 5169 that's possible to the executable script.
Are there any concerns with, like, if you have that in your wallet, a wallet being hacked and then you losing all your loyalty with a company or something if that NFT is now gone?
That's an interesting question. I honestly don't know, right? So if you got hacked and your apps got stolen, I don't see a reason why the issuing party couldn't just execute and then fire off a new one. Because we're not talking about stores of value here. We're talking about applications, right? So it's not that, this was $1 that got stolen. This was just your personal data. So for me as an issuing party, it should be just as simple as you just click a button and say, it's no longer mine. I mean, hell, some of these things could be non-transferable, right? You may not need to have transferable rights on these things. And I'm probably sure a lot of these would not want to be transferable. I think the issuing party would just issue a new one.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And so I'm curious about the kind of the ERC 5169 itself and my limited knowledge on this. So was this something that Smart Token Labs developed, like that concept themselves, or has this been worked on by like a big portion of the Ethereum community, or how did ERC 5169 come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, we put forth it ourselves. We've been doing work since 2017 on the space of really token-centric architecture. And then how do we essentially look at something beyond currencies and collectibles? And that's really kind of where that came from. The whole idea was advanced token utility, right? So I've been focused on this idea of utility for a long time, of saying like, what can we do with these tokens? And to me, that word is utility. And then so that's exactly what that ERC was to enable advanced token utility.
And if you were to break that down maybe at like a very basic level for comparison's sake, what are the main differences between ERC 5169 and say other token standards like ERC 721 or 1155?
Sure. 721, 1155, 720, those are all token standards of the actual token itself. This enables any of those token standards to be extended to carry executable script along with it. So it's still a fungible or a non-fungible, and that doesn't change. What changes is that token now actually carries and brings script with it. So we've done this with a DAI token where you can open a DAI token in a wallet, and rather than just having to then go use a dApp, you can actually get all the interface and information directly on the token itself. And then you can actually trade through the token itself without having to have an external dApp. We've also done this with NFTs. So you can then open the NFTs, like I've said, and have different functionality, whether that be an app inside managing a car or whether other types of experiences. So it doesn't matter about the token type. It just allows any token type to now carry executable script along with it.
So this is great. We've got into some of the sort of like ways that smart tokens could be utilized. The car example's a great one. But where is it today as far as how it's currently being utilized? And what are the future possibilities beyond just, say, giving an example of what it could do? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, the examples we gave, honestly, probably like minimum 5 to 10 years out, right? When you talk about, that's corporate innovation. And as someone who's sold digital transformation to the world's largest companies, shit does not happen fast, right? Like we still run major things on 1970 servers. So like change is slow for most of us. So those are massive things that would take a long time to change. The easiest use cases and where we see the most traction today are really in 2 very specific areas. One is loyalty. So all organizations understand loyalty, and most all organizations understand a key problem with loyalty. That key problem is called value creation. It's very expensive to add more value to your loyalty program. And the reason is because the entire burden of value is borne on the shoulders of the issuing party. If I'm Coca-Cola and I create a loyalty program, I, Coca-Cola, have 100% of the responsibility of creating the value for my loyalty program. So if I want to do something, it now costs me more if I want to create more value, right? So that's the problem. And so what we see is a lot of brands doing 2 things. One, wanting to open up membership to an open idea where they can say, listen, now any of my partners in my partner ecosystem can now treat my customer as their customer because they can know that through the token. And now they can then create and add value, right? So we call that open loyalty, open membership. And we've done that for the Ethereum Foundation, for all of the developer events. We've done it for about 10 different crypto events now, created a program called Permissionless Perks, where if you get a ticket from that event, you then have access to a reward site where all the partners, essentially there's about 50 different crypto partners from Microsoft to Layer Zero, who will all give you something because they want to target crypto users. They want to target developers specifically. So it allows them to create a targeted offer to a targeted group. So that's the easiest. The same thing happens when you have major corporations that have lots of holding companies underneath them. What we have is a house of brands, and they want those sub brands to be able to interact. Essentially, they want a federated loyalty program where the holding company has the ability to interact and recognize all loyalty programs underneath it, as well as all of those loyalty programs have the ability to interact with each other. But each one is owned by itself in its own island, just like you would find like states in a nation. And so that's the idea of federated, where they can all be interoperable, but then still all have their autonomy at the same time. So those are like the 2 big use cases right now in the Web2 world. Well, the one big use case in the Web2 world is loyalty. And then in the Web3 world, what you see is the big use cases are, number 1 is gaming, the ability for us to create new types of game dynamics. So once you now have this token and it can interface in the external world, you can start to get into interoperable tokens, not between games. I don't think the idea of interoperable game assets is really going to go too far. I think the idea of interoperability between the game and the world is much more interesting. Whereas let's say that I have a asset in a game, and let's just use a sword. It's a simple example. And that sword can be upgraded. But the only way it can be upgraded is if I go to a McDonald's. And I go to a McDonald's, I connect it to the McDonald's. They've now unlocked gameplay that could be unlocked any other way. And so now you have the ability for the Web2 brands to start to interact with Web3 games in a meaningful way by creating contextual engagement. So if you want to go back to that book and this idea, what you now have is contextual engagement. And that is defined by helping a person accomplish a goal in the moment. The gamer wants to play a game at a higher level. And the only way to do that is to interact in the real world in some way that's been predefined. And so by them doing that, the brand is able to have a contextual engagement. They can help that person play in a different way or achieve something they couldn't achieve otherwise. And now you give the brand a way to connect beyond sponsorship. So that's kind of really the use cases we're looking at currently.
Super interesting. Why do you think that you mentioned like inter-game play or like 2 different games and moving those assets over wouldn't work? Why is that?
It's extremely complicated. So if you've ever spent time with some games and gamers, you realize that every game is radically hard to create in-game experiences. They spend years developing what that is going to be, right? So to say that you can now just automatically throw something new into that environment is kind of silly to think about once you step through that lens and realize how difficult it is to create anything in game, right? So like you have visual engines, and every game has a different engine. It's not like there's a standard way that we express, even if you have like the language that says X is up, Y is down, Z is right. The next game may say something completely different. All right. So making sure that the asset can even visually be queued up in the same way, would be very difficult. And then two is then you're going to have to start. It just doesn't make much sense, right? We've seen like gamers push back on it. Now, I do think what we'll end up with is marketplaces of game assets, right? So it's essentially extending the in-game economy to the out-game economy, where I can take that sword that I won, I can take it to an external marketplace and I can sell it in an external marketplace, but that game asset is still designed to be used only in that game. So I think that's much more likely of what we will see and what we are seeing.
I love the example you gave, like going to the McDonald's, because it seems like a very McDonald's thing to do, like partner with a brand, bring them into our restaurant, because we're going to entice all the kids, you know, with the freebie they're going to get, and they just got to interact, and then, you know, they get the upgrade or whatever it is. But to go back to your example that I think is maybe similar in regards to like moving an asset from one game to the next. So let's say your same example, you get a sword in the one game, and it's potentially transferable to your other game. I can understand your point about that being like super difficult for developers to consider, and, you know, what asset do you decide to make transferable, but and different game engines and all that. But what if it's the same brand? And so, like you said, what if it's the same brand with the same game engine, but they've built different games? And the same reason McDonald's might want to do that is it could be the same reason, you know, a video game developer would want to pull users from maybe their one most popular game over to one of their secondary more popular games. And they have probably a lot more control over how everything's built. And that could be an incentivization model, could it not? To like, you know,
Totally.
that's maybe you can wrap your head around a little more around it being feasible.
No, I totally can see that as a feasibility, right? We're essentially saying like you've already earned in this game. And like you say, it's a growth lever. Like, so go ahead and go over in this game and you can use those things in this game. We're already starting to see that in the exact same way as a growth lever using this technology, where a brand can say, hey, listen, if you're a player of XYZ game and you have this amount of level of token in that game, you can come over to my game and I'll give you the same amount of level of token. So you can start to then kind of do similar things without having to have the game asset. You can just go essentially cross-chain and start to then create those experiences. They're growth dynamics where you can say, if you have something X and Y, I will give you Z over here. And so we can start to get into that same concept of a growth lever, which is just a vampire attack of a different sort.
What is Smart Pass and the SLN token?
Yeah. So we've got, we've been building since 2017 an open source technology stack to create smart tokens. Smart Layer Network is the ability for the hosting of that technology to be able to scale infinitely through a decentralized method. And then to run that network, there will be SLN token, which will be the currency that will then run that network to help pay the nodes to ensure the scalability and the security of that network. And so that's what SLN is. And that's the Smart Layer Network. The Smart Pass is a current experience that we've created for anyone that wants to go along that journey with us and start to explore what are smart tokens, what can they be. So we've got a community. We've minted, through the community's minted almost 2 million passes to date. That's been open about 2 months. And so we have, you know, the Discord community where we've got a bunch of folks in there engaging, doing quests, earning points, learning about the technology. We just rolled out an ambassador program where we start to have ambassadors who are working on the behalf of, and then starting to work with a different ideas and brands to kind of figure out what do these things mean for these people. And so that's kind of what the Smart Pass is. It's a way to experience our technology. And there's something very specific about the Smart Pass that we haven't talked about. So one of the things that we do is there's a piece of technology called an attestation. An attestation is just a proof of something. And we use attestations. It is a Web3 standard. And we use an off-chain attestation to really solve a lot of these key problems. So if we go to a brand and say, you want to open up your loyalty program? They say, yes. We say, you need to then put that on chain? They say, no. And so through an off-chain attestation, we can enable an individual to have a token. It's an off-chain token. It's still a token, just not signed by a miner. It's still verifiable and uses cryptographic proofs and private public key pairs. And then they have the ability, it's off-chain, so there's no data going on-chain. Customer database is still secure. And then it still functions. You can go to a third party can recognize it and unlock. So the Smart Pass is an attestation. The last thing is they can live in an email address. They can live in your email and they can live in your Apple Wallet. They can live in a browser. They don't require a wallet. So you remove the consumer friction, you remove the creation of an on-chain token, which removes the legal risk, and you remove the worry of putting a public or putting your customer database in a public database. Customer data in a public database. And so that's kind of what that smart pass is. It's the experience of an attestation and what that could be as well.
Do you get any pushback from maybe the OG crypto community that, you're offering this off-chain version of Web3 kind of?
Yeah, all the time. And my pushback to that is there's no part of Web3 that says it has to be on blockchain. There's not. Web3 is about decentralization. It's about the individual ownership of data. It's an ethos. And it does not say Web3 equals blockchain, right? Because if we go down this path, you've got verified credentials. Are verified credentials a part of Web3? Yes, many of them are off-chain. Are decentralized identities a part of Web3? Yes, some of them can be off-chain, right? So I think when we start to, how do we define this? And if we define everything as that it has to be on the blockchain, I think we're going to have a very hard time getting to this idea of mass adoption. If everything has to be on the blockchain, we may realize that the world only has an application for DeFi. So I think that's the question of how do you define Web3? And if you define Web3 as an ethos of those things, then this fits under that definition. If it says it has to be on blockchain, then this and many other things aren't part of Web3.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the different timelines to get to some of these things that we envision. Because, one example, and not to beat this point to death, but I think about Mr. Beast, I think it was last month, put out a video, and then one of his advertisements in that video had to do with this creator league. And then some of the gamers who were associated with this, when they realized it was NFT technology, they instantly were like backing out. They're putting out Twitter statements. Sorry to my community, I didn't realize this. So it's like very clear that people, which is a silly thing to those people who understand, like we're just talking about a form of technology, but how closely it's associated with like scamming and that type of thing. So I know that's a big question, but just in terms of like, where do you think we need to get mindset wise? And do you think that's also kind of 5 years away, 5 to 10 years of just the greater public looking at this technology in a different way?
That's a really good question. The technology is so tainted we have a horrible PR problem. And the PR problem was really spurred by the last two waves that we've experienced were all driven by radical financial speculation. Mm-hmm. That has really kind of put this whole technology in a very sour light. That's why I also think we have not progressed, because all the builders are only after the things that make them the most money, which is creating a new project, launching a token, pumping that token. We're not looking at people really wanting to create advanced utility. The concept is, how many NFT projects do we have? Show me anything that an NFT project has done beyond token gating and allowing access to a community, right? You've got some DAOs that have created technology. You've got some DAOs that have done some cool things. But in general, NFT projects don't have much utility, and they're not incentivized to have to create that utility because they're all driven off financial speculation right now of, buy this, it will go up, right? Even if you look at some of the really popular projects that have what I would call like legitimate projects like Time, you're still looking at a majority of those holders are only there for speculation. They're not finding that as a better way to have a subscription to a magazine. They're not finding that as a better experience. They literally are there because of their speculators, and they believe that this is going to go up, so I'm going to hold this token. So, I think they all play together in that scenario. But I think for us to get to that next step is we have to give the world use cases beyond currencies and collectibles, because that's what the majority of the world needs, right? They're going to need to see a better song experience. They're going to need to see some type of better ownership experience. They're going to need to see some type of thing that actually impacts their life in a meaningful way. And until we do that, I don't think we're going to get there. So I think that goes back to your question of either one, we've got to have a killer use case that people will suck up the pain, or two, we've got to have the pain be so low that we can have small use cases and kind of grow over time.
And on the same subject, in the world of NFTs and speculation, we've seen recently the NFT market as a whole for the last maybe 6 months or so has really just been crashing. It's in a total bear market. And as sad as that is for speculators who have seen their NFTs drop massively in value, and it doesn't seem like there's much opportunity right now from a buying perspective, considering everything's still just sideways and down. Does that level out the playing field for true value in NFT projects. So what I mean is, if you think about the majority of NFT projects today, at least those who have the great majority of trading volume and things like that. I mean, again, it's all speculation. They're mostly PFP projects. And at the end of the day, if we break it down and we do just call it a JPEG, people are paying astronomical fees for what is a piece of art, and not even a one of one piece of art, but a piece of art that's been generated 10,000 times or whatever the number is in the collection. Are we seeing the reality of that set in for investors and speculators? The fact that, whoa, maybe this just isn't actually worth what everybody's been paying. Now that the hype's died down, maybe this was all a ripoff to begin with. And until we see real utility and real value come through these NFT projects, nobody's ever going to pay that again. Do you think that is potentially the case, or are we just in a cycle and we're at lows and everything's going to pop off and go crazy again in the near future?
I mean, if I had the perfect answer to that one, I would be speculating.
You're a quasi-futurist, so I have to ask.
So this is the quasi part. I don't have a clear answer on this one. One is, I think, yes. I think the world has said, hey, we don't see the value here, right? And the value was just rapid speculation driven by the media hype cycles. The reason there was media hype cycles because there were massive dollar signs. When you sell a digital thing that never existed for $69 million, people are going to write about it. And then because people started writing about it, you get people like me start talking about it. And then you get businesses interested in it, and it just drives this big hype cycle. Yes, everything's down. And no, I don't think the prices are going to come back up. Either one, until you said, until there is clear utility for those things. Or two, there's another bull cycle. If there's another bull cycle, things will pop no matter what. That's just because how they're going to happen. But I don't know if what that bull cycle is going to be driven off of, right? And so I think that's the question of, I think the bull cycle will most likely be driven off of some large global event that will essentially make the idea of cryptocurrency very clear and drive the demand, because it will prove that this is a necessary thing that's needed. But if we just talk about like what drove the last two cycles, there was the ICO craze. We're not going to have another one of those, not anytime soon. Then there was the NFT craze. We've already gone through that, right? So it has to be something net new, and we don't necessarily know what that is yet. So it's either some type of advanced utility, but I don't see that as like being sexy enough to drive a hype cycle. I don't see the world being like, oh, you made utility? Like, oh, that's worth like $10 billion. No, I don't see that. So I really don't know. But I think if there is another hype cycle, I think everyone does believe that they'll all pop back off, which I mean, I've heard people say that, hey, what we're going to do right now is we're going to buy up a bunch of these NFTs while they're down. And I'm kind of like, you do you, brother.
Sweezey, this has been an awesome conversation. You're really good at just kind of like articulating all of these concepts. Going into it, doing research for this, both Ulf and I knew we had a lot of questions, but you've explained everything really well. But you're not off the hook yet. We like to end every episode of Show Me the Crypto with a 3-question segment we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf is going to ask you those questions.
Fire away.
All right, Sweezey, you ready?
Yeah.
The first question, who's your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Trailmix.eth. It's my buddy. He's a generative artist.
Cool. I'll have to check him out.
Yeah.
All right. Second question. What will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from today?
Tap into that quasi-futurist.
Shit, 10 years from today, I'm going to go with $127,000.
Love the specifics.
All right. Great. And the third question, what is the most underrated project in the crypto space?
Other than Smart Token Labs. That's
a hard one. I don't know. That's too hard to answer on the fly. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more.
It can also be like a big category kind of thing. So like, I mean, really an acceptable answer would be like utility.
NFTs. Yeah, executable NFTs. Then, I mean, if you think about executable NFTs in a really interesting way, the wallet is the super app of the future. And if the wallet's the super app of the future, then the question is, what are the applications? And if it's the wallet, then I believe the tokens become the applications. Like I think executable NFTs are probably the most underrated concept.
Sweezey, this has been super interesting. Thank you so much for joining Ulf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.